60 million kids in the US alone participate in some level of extracurricular activities. There's a generation that's pretty much overscheduled, but at the same time, it stresses them out. So you have to
Yeah.
just figure out what's the right balance for what your kid can take on as that workload. They need to own their time. They need to understand that mom's not always going to be around. What's really unique about our product is that we ourselves can be the users of it. Very much focused on obviously all things that are technological solutions for either the household or the parents. It's an extension of what our parental experience means.
First question, I always like to jump in with something hot. If somebody were to play you in a movie, who would it be?
Okay, I just got this yesterday. There's a twofold answer. When I was younger, J-Lo was one because I would wear my hair like super sleek, and I'm from Brooklyn, so close enough to Jenny from the block. And then yesterday I got Julia Roberts, which I didn't know where that came from, but I will take either
Okay.
in any proximity to either of them is a high compliment.
Now I thought this was a unique question, but now I have to ask, what was the game you were playing and what was the scenario where they asked this question?
Oh, I was in a facial yesterday. That's real life. She's like, and she was like from the other angle, upside down. I was like, oh, again, thank you. But no, no worries.
So the reason I ask you that is, of course, with your background, it's been so interesting to hear your story. Of course, for those who don't know the audience, coming to New York, 1992, your mom's in IT. Drop us back in that time when, first of all, the fact that your mother was in IT as a profession is fairly, like pretty nuanced in that day and age, but also what was the impact of her in that profession that it had on you as you two were coming to the country and really just trying to figure things out?
Yeah, I mean, let's go all the way back. So I came to the States, specifically to Brooklyn, when I was 9 years old. I was turning 10 that year. And we came from the Ukraine, from a city called Kherson. You may have been hearing a little bit about them on the news, unfortunately, in the last, year and a half or two. So we came here in 1992, and it was just my mom and I. It was just the two of us, a single mom. When I tell you that we had $20 in our pocket, like that, I am not lying about it. I swear to God, there was a $20 bill. That's what it was. We stopped over, I think it was like the Frankfurt airport, because we flew from St. Petersburg to Germany, and then ultimately JFK. I remember there was a kiosk in which there was a little stuffed elephant. And I asked my mom, I was like, I really love this stuffed elephant. She's like, Zoe, we physically cannot break this $20 bill because that's our ride from JFK Airport to our apartment. Like, we cannot buy the stuffy. So to this day, I'm like, I really love that stuffy. But it was
What did
symbolic of like the thing that we needed to do, and that, what we came here for.
Yeah, and how was that transition like? Because it's not like, nowadays where I can, view an apartment virtually
Yeah.
via FaceTime. How was that transition finding a place to be and just being at YouTube? Did you have any family or anyone here
No, we
locally?
had a very close family friend that just helped to secure a place for us to land from an apartment perspective, but that was really it. And so we left my grandparents, my father really behind as well. It's just the two of us. And so my mom went to work right away. Like, we landed that weekend, whenever it was, and she went to work in the city. She was a computer programmer, developer at the time. And so she kind of had that job lined up, thankfully. And I was like 9 years old in Brooklyn by myself, and I would walk around the corner in Brighton Beach. I would go to the public library there, and I would spend my entire day there at the library learning English. And I would have my Russian English, dictionary. I would have my Disney books, and I would sit there and I just would like flip pages and study words to be ready for school in September, like days of the week, numbers, letters,
Wow.
all the things. And so that was my summer. But luckily the beach was right there, and it was just like she'd come home at 5:30, 6 o'clock. We'd go to the beach, and that was our summer, like just kind of getting ready for a new life.
And obviously nowadays, even in the recent past, it was, so popular to study engineering, computers, especially software.
Yeah.
Now it's almost like ridiculous if you don't know something. But at that time, what was the benefit, or what did you think that translated to your career growth eventually? Because you've kind of married this beautiful finance analyst, but also technology. Did that impact your trajectory as a person?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my mom, as I mentioned, was in technology at a time when not many were, but because she had this career path that allowed for her to come into a new country and have a transferable skill set that she was able to deploy in a place where otherwise she would probably have to have had other types of jobs, as many of our, friends and peers had at the time. So she was able to deploy her profession. So that was really inspiring to me. And I was just around technology always. And that was my major. I went to college for it. But I do remember there was one moment where I was like, Mom, I really love psychology. Like, I love organizational psych. I love behavioral psych. And I started to take a bunch of courses in college. And she was like, how are you going to make money with that? Like, she didn't even understand that that was a potential career path. And I remember being impassioned by it, but I just was like slapped on the wrist being like, no, no, don't look away, look straight, kind of keep on path. And so of course I stayed and probably would not have looked back, but I do remember that moment being like, is there a world outside of technology? But no, I didn't pursue anything. It was more,
Yeah. Early in your career, it seemed like it was still kind of a pseudo technology role, but it started to bleed more into an organizational analytics and really kind of from more of a, I guess bird's eye view perspective, more of a strategy role. And what kind of graduated that transition? Did you fall in love with something else along the way that kind of bled your interest into a different, yeah, kind of a different path, but adjacent to what you were set out to do?
for sure. So at the time that I went to school, which was year 2000, the great year to ever have graduated from high school was the year 2000. Sidebar, we were at a party at my house for New Year's Eve, and we were all waiting to see what would happen when the year 2000 would turn, right? The 00, the Y2K.
Yeah.
You may have heard of this. So my mom, for her workplace at the time she was with MetLife, she was working on software that would be ready for Y2K, as every other technology and every other business was as well. So we all kind of were at my house and we're waiting for like the countdown, and then just kind of like close your eyes real quick and we're like, did anything happen? Is everything still working? Was the team out? Or like, and
What was it again? It was like it was like a timing sequence, or what was
well,
the
because it
two
was
the white
zero
two?
zero, the ending two
Right.
numbers, and everything was fine prior to it. It was 99, 98, like
Yeah.
79, everything was fine. And then it was 00. So there was a lot of implication to algorithms and things at the time that really kind of had to prepare for what
Yeah.
happens when you get 00. So pretty much every company was, spending lots and lots of time and money trying to be ready for that. Anyway, sidebar. But yeah, college. So my path was computer science, as I mentioned. And so when I started in the computer science degree, I just was like, gosh, there's got to be something else out there in terms of the industry. Like, not every single person who's in IT is sitting there and coding all day. There's like many other disciplines surrounding like the broader industry. And so
Yeah.
I was so lucky. I've uncovered, it was an experimental program that my university, Rutgers, was running at the time, called Information Technology and Informatics, which again recognized the diversity of that evolving field. And so I was lucky enough to get into that program, kind of grassroots. We were feeding into the curriculum. I remember kind of like we were shaping the coursework as we were going along. And so that was the way that I kind of fell into it, is to say, here's this diverse IT path. And then as I started to, kind of climb up the ranks, and financial services was where I started, as well as banking. Then you get into management and you do less coding. You do obviously more strategy, more oversight. That became M&A, mergers and acquisitions, as we started to kind of, work within, various portfolios that we were purchasing and integrating those technologies and so forth. And it kind of went from there.
Yeah. Obviously, I want to get into Orgo and the company, and but just out of pure curiosity, within those big organizations, when they're going through these different strategy sessions, how do they go about the acquisition process or go-to-market strategy? Being that they have so many resources to deploy, I'm on the other side of the spectrum, and now where everything's bootstrapped. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
if I had more, I would do more. How do you go from the reverse and kind of actually deploy capital the right way?
Yeah. I was part of two, but one that was most memorable at a time, that it was such foundational experience, but also the people that I was going through that process with were kind of, I hate to say family, but I was within that particular team and that organization the longest in my career. And so that was the time when we were building, MetLife had a bank. Few people know this. MetLife Bank was kind of like an offshoot of the
Hmm.
insurance portfolio. And then the regulation was very friendly at the time for insurance companies to spin up a bank. And so we did. And so I was part of like the smaller kind of founding team that was initially plucked from the broader enterprise organization and came together to go ahead and build out that bank in the portfolio over time. It was deposits mostly. And then we had reverse mortgage, forward mortgage divisions and so forth, and a bunch of other assets. And so the time came when the regulation changed. And so it was no longer, advantageous to have a bank essentially part of the portfolio. So we had to divest many of those assets, including the deposits portfolio that we'd spent all of those years as a team building over time. So it was kind of this full circle, right? Growing it, operationalizing it, integrating it, and then ultimately figuring out a way to divest it. And so I was leading the divestiture of that effort from an IT perspective, along with, many other of my peers. And so we came to the other side was GE. At first it was GE Capital, then it was GE Capital Retail Bank. We swung that portfolio over, we integrated it, and then we wound up being employees on the GE side. And then we IPO'd, ultimately stemming from that portfolio into what you know today is Synchrony Financial. So it was kind of like this full swing. It was quite a few years. During that time, I had my second daughter. And so it was just like this very memorable, tumultuous, exciting time, talking with the M&A team and figuring out what's our strategy, thinking about portfolio, the people, the process, the tech, and how we're basically going to close the deal. So that was an exciting time.
In a company like that, how do you stay close to a product, being that, it's a large organization, there's a lot of moving pieces, it's not as intimate, as say a founder experience, but you still have this team camaraderie. How do you stay close to the product or the outcome? Is that a cultural thing internally? And what are the things that actually help the employees actually feel the impact of their work?
That's a great question, because it really is difficult to stay connected, especially when you are so far removed from the end consumer. You're ultimately all working collectively toward a collective outcome for the benefit of the consumer, for the benefit of the business. But because it's broken down in so many different parts and pieces, and of course organizations are complex at that size, it is very difficult to fully appreciate and become impassioned by that process end to end, and thus the outcome as well, which is why the shift, to this entrepreneurial founder space was a homecoming for me, because when we were small and I was part of smaller teams, that passion was close to heart. And then through the years, becoming part of bigger organizations, taking on bigger roles, you lose that kind of connection from it. So now I'm coming back full circle, self-selected too, of course, because I just loved feeling, excited about something that I can directly affect every day.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned that story about your mom going off to work. You're 9 years old. You're going to the
By the way, I
library.
don't know how DIFUS didn't come for us. Like, I was by myself on the streets of
Really?
Brooklyn. Oh yeah, because she went to work and we didn't
Yeah,
have
yeah,
any,
yeah.
so I was physically in the library by myself, but I digress. So,
And I was gonna say, no, I mean, you're walking, you're 9 years old, you're doing this day to day. Today, that sounds like, obviously, for a lot of parents, kind of a nightmare scenario, because back then, I'm sure there was no direct line of communication. There's no cell phone, there's no find my kid, find my phone, find my ear pod. There's none of that information. And describe kind of like the pressures that parents today are feeling now that there's a whole different environment. There's a lot more to consider. Maybe there isn't. Maybe there's a lot more light. How's the parental experience from your mom's generation different from now in terms of how much you have to really think about when your kid's in an environment?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't even have to surmise. I can personally speak from my own three daughters. Comes back full circle, right? With all the daughters that I have. I have a 13, I have a 9, and a 6-year-old. So really, that 9-year-old is precisely in that space and time of the parallel that you're trying to draw. And it's a completely different world, of course. Like the latchkey generation is gone. Myself, I would include being a part of that. I remember just going off 40 blocks away, 30 blocks away to meet up with friends, and my mom just not ever knowing where I was. I would rollerblade through, for anybody who's listening, who's from Brooklyn or in the area, like Bensonhurst, Bay Ridge, 86th Street, 3rd Avenue. I hope somebody's nodding their heads. Like you just would just rollerblade and kind of like stay in the bus lane to stay safe. So no, there was no connectivity and there's no connection or communication at that point here. Overly communicating, right? Like overly connected. We fear the second that they leave the house, we have to track them. So I, as a mom, as a parent, kind of fall victim to that normalcy that we've all come to grow and hate at this point. But at the same time, there's a lot of independence that I try to develop in them in various ways. So we
Yeah.
try to strike that balance. It's hard. It's different.
Yeah, and there's so many different platforms to be connected with as well. And where do you see a lot of parents kind of not necessarily the pain point, but how do you ease the concern with the technology that you're building?
Yeah, we'll give a little context as to what Orgo really is on a mission to hopefully improve. But I will say that through sports, which all three of my kids participate very actively in, we do a ton of extracurricular activities. We do youth sports, including they're on the competitive swim teams. They do travel soccer, travel lacrosse, you name it. Of course, we do some musical instruments as well to balance everything out. But that kind of aids the independence because there's carpools, there's times that they're not with us. They have to be mindful of schedules, they have to manage time, they have to be responsible for their belongings and kind of be committed to the obligations that they have as part of the schedule. So that as a parent, by extension, we set in their kind of normalcies that this is the
Mm.
life that we lead, this is the pace that we're all kind of keeping up with. By the way, I'm not alone in doing that. Everybody pretty much in suburban communities, plus or minus, and of course inner cities as well, experience that norm these days. And so that's one part of the way that they feel independent. But yeah, it's hard for sure to keep up with it all. And of course, you're fighting with the 13-year-old to put down the
Yeah.
phone, 9-year-old's asking for it, then the 6-year-old with like makeup from Sephora, and you're just like, what is this world come to? I cannot, I can't say no that many times in a day. It's too much.
Yeah, I know. Well, I was gonna ask too. I mean, there's obviously just a huge gender difference with child rearing. How does that impact the fact that you have three daughters? Do you ever think about like, oh, what if I had three sons, and would this have led to Orgo and this product? Thinking about safety at such a extreme level.
Yeah, I always thought I was going to have boys, like, because I'm such a guy's girl. I was athletic growing up. My childhood, as we talked about, was a little bit. Um, I would say like it lost its continuity because 9 years old is a pivotal age, right? Like 9 years
Mhm.
old, you have friends, you have an identity, you have ideas, you have a past, you have a future, and so that was kind
Mm.
of reset at a time where I had to kind of move and do all those things all over again. By the way, I've moved probably about 11 to 13 times in my life, like 9 different schools. It's fun. But so my kids have the betterment, obviously, of being in a place where we're stable and we're living in the same place. They've got the same friends for a long, long time. But nonetheless, I just felt like I would always have boys because I would be climbing trees and jumping off rooftops and like doing stupid shit. But no, with each girl that came, I was like, okay, well, now we got a different challenge here. And so my grandma is one of three sisters. It kind of came full circle when I now am also the continuity of that legacy, if you will. So we come from a
Yeah.
strong line of women. And so that's the challenge that I've kind of embraced and taken on through the years, is to say my responsibility as a woman, as a parent, as a mom in this world is to produce three strong women in my own liking, and my mom's liking, and my grandma's, and so forth. And that's kind of how we've looked at it. But we raise boys, girls. I don't know if that is something that means something to someone else. For me, that means we don't treat our girls differently than we would boys. Yes, they're participating in different activities and so forth, but we have expectations of them all the same. They have to be strong. They have to stand up for themselves. They have to be independent. They have to be outspoken, physical, all of the things. And so that's kind
Yeah.
of how we started to navigate. But the harder years are still to come. So check in with me in like a year when I have a 14-year-old, then I'll probably sing a different tune.
Yeah, yeah. In addition to that, are there just with there's so much growing external concerns, we hear so much news and we're bombarded by so much from a parent's perspective. I feel like that's elevated because now it's not necessarily, I can protect myself, but there's so much less control over somebody else's life as, your child grows and begins
Yeah.
to see the world. When you think about building for parents, how much of just the psychology of what they're concerned about is built into the design of the product?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point because especially within the fam tech space, which we find ourselves now becoming a part of, it's a category that is very much focused on obviously all things that are of technological solutions for either the household or the parents. It's an extension of what our parental experience means. There's a lot of responsibility in that. So when we think about the ecosystem, like right now, we've got this great debate, from a product perspective, how we're going to monetize. Is it going to be subscription based? Is it going to be, ad based? Is there going to be some freemium, of course, hybrid model of the both? And today we still skew on the side of subscription simply because it then is a closed loop. There is
Mm,
no perception of outside interactions that are potentially distracting, such as ads. I'm not saying we'll never do that. And if anything, that we will, it'll be accretive to the parental experience. It'll be an extension of something that we believe would be of value as part of the journey that they're already on, or as part of the activity that they're already doing, or the sport that they're involved with, and so forth. So this notion of safety, I think, is there's a norm in FamTech that safety is important. We obviously have to be super, super secure in terms of our software and so forth, the infrastructure, because, we live in a world where we must. And if we're dealing with our most precious assets, as our children, are and our household is, that's kind of the responsibility that we bear.
yeah. And how do you get to the customer that you're, going after, being that, families, they have so many different professions, so many different ages, so many different geolocations. When you set out to build Orgo, where did you start finding your customer? Where did you go to start collecting information and feedback
Yep.
and start really building your MVP?
Yeah, also a really great question, because I think what's really unique about our product is that we ourselves can be the users of it. So unlike, in the B2B space or other SaaS kind of endeavors where it's like you really need your first few clients to really shape and mold the product and the vision, we ourselves are designing the experience for ourselves, because it is directly stemming from pain points that I have lived with for a majority of years of managing our household and logistics surrounding youth sports and extracurricular activities and all the runaround. So the pain point is direct and it's personally felt. In fact, it was a binding factor of myself and the co-founders when we first started to talk about the opportunity, and we said, you feel the pain point too. And so that relationship to the
Yeah.
problem statement is a problem founder fit that I think is so unique to what it is that we're designing. So firstly, it came from within. It was a point of view that we asserted as co-founders, myself as somebody, in working with our UX designer, to say, here's what I would like my personal experience to look and feel like for the problem that I have been experiencing in the past X years. Once we
Yeah.
kind of got that process initially down on paper, and of course, Figma is wonderful for that. It's a great tool for us to ideate around. We started to introduce and request external sets of eyes. So it's the friends and family. That's how we're so
Yeah.
lucky, is to say, I'm not the only one who's experiencing this problem. I need something better than what I have today from a logistics management standpoint. The calendar sucks. Hey, about you too? Okay, cool. Come over here. See, take a look at what we kind of have, in mind. And then our vision started to become a bit more anchored to our point of view. Last October, we launched Alpha to friends and family cohort of about 20 to 30 users from the community. So we
Yeah.
had a downloadable, executable mobile app that was resident on their phones that they lived with for 2 to 3 weeks, with the then functionality that was kind of the baseline value proposition, if you will. And they lived with it every day. And we collected real-time feedback from them, user interviews, side-by-side observations, and then they had a way for us to, communicate with us directly and relay that feedback. So that was early stage. That really kind of solidified
Yeah.
that anchoring point of view. And then we continue to build on from there.
And what was when you're thinking about growing the audience from there, how do you kind of guide that in terms of like, is it word of mouth? Is it
Yeah,
referrals? Do you go with an actual go-to-market strategy and start advertising?
for
How do you
sure.
stay core to the mission with having the responsibility as a company to start growing, scaling, and become profitable?
For sure. So we're literally a couple of weeks out from launching our beta, which is the next iteration from an infrastructure perspective. Certainly functionality. Absolutely, the stack has evolved. We've hardened our back end, our front end is smoother, sexier, and so forth. So that is kind of
Yeah.
what we've dubbed as our beta. So many probably would have called beta what we did alpha to friends and family, but vernacular. So now we have about 350 customers that we have secured as part of our wait list. And that was just through organic means. It was just a little bit of social media. It was, personal posts that I had done as an extension of my network, both on LinkedIn as well as Facebook and others. And we just said, hey, if this is something that resonates with you and you feel this pain point every day, come check us out. You'll be the first to kind of shape and mold our journey from
Yeah.
here. So that's a couple of weeks out. But in terms of what happens there, I mean, you can imagine, right? It's your TikTok, it's your Instagram, it's your socials. You got to meet them where they are. There's mommy
Right.
groups that I'm a part of. There are community conversations that are happening surrounding, this problem that I'll be plugging into. So that's all very much ahead. And that is aligned with our B2C strategy. There's a different B2B strategy thereafter, but it all kind of starts at this, grassroots kind of ground level.
Yeah. How often do like the logistics of getting your kids places impact them doing activities?
Okay. I'm going to show you something. I swear to God, I did not have this ready, but it's easy to pull up because I want you to appreciate like what a Saturday looked like. No, this is a Friday. I don't know if you could see this.
Okay, yeah.
That's a day. That is a day that needed to be reconciled, deciphered with a Rosetta Stone of who needs to be what, where, and how and
Yeah.
when. This, we're not teleporting unicorns. We can't be at, the same place at the same time. Um, so the logistics really determine who goes where and how and by whom and when, and it's a full-time job. Anybody will tell you like your phone's going to be ringing off the hook just trying to get text messages in your WhatsApp groups, in your carpool text groups, and Team Snap is bombarding you. We love them, but at the same time there's just a lot of information that's coming down from every single channel that needs to be actioned on the part of the parent, by
Yeah.
extension of which is the kid that has to get to that place and also be ready for that. And I think that there's a generation that's pretty much overscheduled, and so it's an imbalance of you want to do good, you want them to participate in things, you want them to be responsible and further their skill set, their athleticism, their musicality, their arts and whatnot, but at the same time, like it stresses them out. So you have to
Yeah.
just figure out like what's the right balance for what your kid can kind of take on as that workload. And not to mention school, of course, and
Yeah.
social, everything else that, they're contending with.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I come from, I'm one of six. I'm the oldest. I get
And
it. I got left behind a few times, fend for
all
myself.
the time,
I
right?
get
Wrong. It's like, oh, I'm wrong field. Sorry, I picked up the wrong kid. Like, sorry.
it.
Well, it's good.
Um,
Sounds like you can relate, but on the other side.
yeah, well, I was curious, what are, obviously there's, group chats and there's, Telegram if you want to get really secure with it. There's WhatsApp group if you come from more of an international family. What are
Yeah.
parents using now to just coordinate all this? Because I'm assuming, I mean, at least with my experience, it was not just my mom. It might have been my dad picking me up, might have been a
It's
friend,
a
it might have
village.
been an uncle, it might have been a village of people
It is.
assigned to me. Yeah, what were people using before?
So I can't speak to before because again, I too, unlike you, I actually never had that experience because if I had sports, if I had activities, I would like figure out to get myself there, like my mom was working. So
Yeah.
this was not my experience personally, but today it's all the things that you've described. So WhatsApp is not even being used internationally for us. It's just a way to manage groups. It's a
Yeah.
WhatsApp group for kindergarten moms, for third grade moms, for seventh grade moms, then or daisies and kindergarten. So it's just this functional grouping that allows people's brains to be bifurcated of like, okay, what am I even talking about, and
Mm,
who is this group of people that are obviously communicating and trying to share information. So that is definitely one, and a very active channel at that. So it's just constant bang 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 all day long. Text threads, of course, we're trying to name the text threads accordingly. This is the carpool for that, or this is the, and it's just everywhere. And there's emails, of course, coming from all the coaches and from all the different
yeah.
team management apps. And so again, this reconciliation of ultimately that information and that data that lives disparately in all those channels,
Mm,
what's kind of the funnel? Well, we as people are the funnel. And it's
mm,
manually intensive day in and day out to reconcile and receive that data, process it, and
yeah.
actually operationalize it if we had to have to get technical, and show up at the right place at the right time with the actual people that are supposed to be there. Like that's our task. And it's
Yeah.
daily and it's a lot.
Yeah. It's interesting because, I feel like it's underrated the amount of effort I think it takes to coordinate and also just like raise a family. Think about just like how much effort my parents had to put in. And this whole category of fam tech is obviously newer. Yeah, I think back in like early 2000s there was this video phone that my grandparents could call through. It never worked. And then outside of that, there wasn't really ways to connect within families. When did this fam tech industry really start to pick up, and where do you see it really integrating? Is it mainly in the family logistics space? Is it all across the board? When did it really come about, and where is it evolved to now? What are the different products being created?
Yeah, I mean, I'm new to it myself as well, to be honest with you. Like as high tech of a household as we think that we are, my husband's pretty technical. I obviously am as well. We didn't really invite technology into our family per se in very intentional ways. We had our Google Calendar and our Apple Calendar, and we're just trying to kind of write on the whiteboard and communicate amongst ourselves with all the things that we've just described, the text messages and so forth. So I can't say that we're overly sophisticated that way, but I do know that there's a ton of newer products that have hit the market that are specifically servicing the household from that household management point of view, recognizing that the roles now, of course, are balanced, that there is this village, there is this need to communicate. Kids are involved. Like one of the great benefits of Orga that we've envisioned is that your kid will have this loaded on their phone in a way that maybe 10 and above can appreciate, because they need to own their time. They need to understand that mom's not always going to be around, or whomever's in the household, to be like,
Mm.
time to start getting ready, time to leave the house. Like someone's always yelling at them and directing them very explicitly. Whereas
Yeah.
executive skills would say, these are the skills that will set you up for life. You need to understand how to anticipate time, manage to task, plan for that, in advance and proactively and so forth. So that's kind of our point of view on it. But again, there's a lot of technology that will now place additional devices into your household that can be shared and communicated amongst the members. There's no shortage of those that hang on your wall, or they're sitting on your countertop. They're, hooked into Alexa or whatever. So we're integrating that more and more. We just kind of take a different point of view on it to say those are all great in-house products that manage the household in ways like groceries and recipes and
Yeah.
chore management. Like that's outside of scope for us. We're very focused on what happens when you leave the home. And that's when the logistics kick in. Because when you leave the house, our point of view or our thesis is that the calendar breaks down. Like
Yeah.
12 to 1 on my calendar that sits on my phone, where, my soccer game's 12 to 1 is an example. I like to coin it to say it's never 12 to 1. Like 12 to 1 is never 12 to 1.
Yeah.
It's you got to be there 30 minutes earlier. You have to drive 45 minutes away to a field you've never heard of. You have to start yelling at your kids 15 minutes ahead of time to start getting their blue uniform together. Then you have to
Yeah.
drive back on the tail end of that trip. So the whole end-to-end process really entails close to 3 hours in that example, versus the
Yeah.
one singular hour that lives erroneously on the calendar itself. So it's the very definition of logistics, getting the right people to the right places on time, that we're trying to tackle specifically, fully recognizing and appreciating that there's other household type tasks and items that perhaps other companies are more focused on and are impassioned by than we are.
Yeah. And it's something I don't think we often think about, but what's like the TAM for your product? What's the addressable market that you're going after? How many families with, I would say probably two or more kids when it becomes
Yeah.
difficult,
Well, 60
right?
million kids in the US alone participate in some level of extracurricular activities. And that is not even like a far-fetched number. That probably is I've actually done some research on this. It's really difficult to kind of, identify exactly what that
Yeah.
number is, because it's such a norm and expectation. Colleges expect it. Your service hours, your social life depends on it. It's just so much ingrained in how we experience, the world today, is that
Yeah.
we want to be involved in things outside of just the immediate studies. So it's quite large. And we
Yeah.
like to think, the probably the sweet spot from an age group perspective where logistics really kick in, simply stemming from my own experience, but I would say it really begins to be felt 6 years old on. 6 to 17, before they kind of start driving themselves around, 6 to 16 is where, it's a long time where you're just running around and you're kind of living for these things. You're living by your calendar. You got to get to places. You're just governed by,
Right.
these commitments.
Yeah. You talked to big announcement, I think recently you're putting in some AI into the
Yep.
technology. Obviously that's always super popular nowadays to
I know. I
discuss
hate to
that, but
even mention it. Because
but
it's so
but from
taboo. Like, well, of course we're doing it. Of course.
well, I'm just saying from, from a building standpoint, what does it offload in terms of from a human perspective, but building a product like this, and how does it allow you to really maintain, a bootstrap team to actually, hit the results? Back then, it's like, okay, I need to build more. I got to raise a bunch of money to hire a bunch of talented people. You don't need that as much for the average product, I would say.
Yeah.
What has AI really allowed your company to do, and you as a founder that you appreciate now? in reflection to what was actually available prior.
Absolutely. It was a matter of timing, and the timing could not have been more fortuitous. I remember where I was exactly in the conversation that we were having with the team. We had a ton of learnings coming out of the alpha phase I mentioned, the Friends and Family back in
Yeah.
October, and there were some common observations about, some potential pitfalls to come in terms of, the data input or the data entry into the ecosystem being like creation of the events, and a lot of folks were asking for the integration to be had with the existing Google Calendar and so forth. So we were kind of debating how we were going to tackle that. And then Dev Days came out. And then, all the AI, the ChatGPT updates were kind of being shared. And so we were receiving this information real time going like, hold on, guys. We can literally double down on developing an Orgo GPT
Yeah.
and then figuring out how to tackle the very problem that we just learned about from our existing user base, the very few that we had at the time, but we knew that it could be, a problem at scale. And let's see how we can kind of marry up the two. I will say, though, that we've been very tempered in our focus within AI because ultimately that is the goal. That is very much on the trajectory and the roadmap, but it will not be part of the initial beta launch. Why? Is because we still are at that basic value proposition phase where before we overlay any additional bells and whistles and complexities and all the things that are super great about AI, we first want to ensure that they're acclimated to the ecosystem and the environment, the usability is on point, the value is being had, and then we can further, kind of operationalize those additional AI features as a fast follower. But remember, we have to be very careful in the B2C space of how we introduce AI into the home. I can't lead with this into a B2B market or SaaS or coming to a room like, many other founders can and say, we are AI first, we are AI led. We say we will have AI boosted capabilities that will further your experience in a way that should not feel abrasive in any way within the
Artificial.
day-to-day life. So we kind of have to,
Right.
balance that very carefully.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you see today as your biggest risk to the company?
We just had a pretty rough conversation last night, rough in terms of, some mature talk, some real talk amongst the founders. And so we still stand before some core functionality defects that we really need to address. I mean, like, again, we're kind of at the stage where we're launching this baby. We really want to make sure that it's received and is stable and quality first. Quality driven is, our first and foremost principle there. And so does it mean that there's a couple of trade-offs and the additional features that we wanted to also include as part of beta? Probably those trade-offs are, it's like tale as old as time, right? It's like we're strapped for time. That's a constraint. We still want to launch. We want to make sure there's quality. So we were just kind of discussing through that. And then once the cat is out in just a few weeks, what we're going to be doing is building a community around this initial cohort of like the 350. We call it the mighty 300, from like the 300
Spartans.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
I saw
Spartans.
it.
We're heading into battle. Like no casualties, I promise. Like poor timing for those kind of jokes. But we will nurture this community in a way that we will learn from them. We hope, we will ask for their patience and certainly understanding as we kind of test and learn alongside with them. But that's 100% focused right now is what happens when we cross that threshold and what lies on the other side.
Yeah. And what do you see as a long-term vision? Is it built into schools? Is it built
Yeah.
into, certain organizations, sports organizations? Where do you see Orgo becoming, not just at right now, kind of easing families' minds, but how is it integrated into the whole experience? What do you see?
Yeah, I'm super pumped about what happens after B2C. Like it's definitely a B2C to B kind of play that we recognize the power and the importance of nurturing the consumer experience. And that is where it begins, and that's where it needs to kind of continue along those lines. And it's a very different go-to-market strategy, obviously, for securing those users and making sure that that continues to
Yeah.
grow. The bigger play thereafter, or rather one that's concurrent, is what I've always deemed to be the marrying of Orgo's promise into the upstream, where the data actually lives and it stems from. So I, as a parent, and still that kind of sports example, I don't get to set what field I'm going to and what time I have to arrive. That is dictated to me by those organizations.
Right.
Those organizations are managed elsewhere and certainly outside of us. We are parent aligned, we are parent led. They are team oriented. So today, the way that that works is that there'll be an email or there'll be various updates that are sent asynchronously to the parent. The parent has to execute on what is being asked of them to do, as we are in many other areas in our life. And so bridging the gap between the two technically, integrating, Orgo further upstream, closer to where the data and the information actually resides, is very much a vision of ours that we will be looking to explore actively starting probably, Q3, Q2 of this year.
Yeah. You went the better route for sure, rather than going organizations first, because the parents have all the power. We all know that.
They
I mean,
get to
they,
decide. They can make it or break it, which is why it's so important for us to be like, do you like it? Is this valuable? Is this something that you can integrate daily into your life? Because if we build it and they don't come, there is no conversation with B2B.
right.
There's no value to pass down, into this end-to-end continuum.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming into this section, I love it because I call it my founder FAQ. So I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions and we'll see where we're going to get. All
Do
right.
it. I
First
got my
question.
with me. Hello, ready?
First question I always like to ask is day to day, what's hard about your job?
The fact that we're time constrained, we are bootstrapped, it's sweat equity, it's on borrowed time, the team is not together. I've got a whiteboard here. We work asynchronously, for the most part, we've got stand-ups, but time is a constraint. And if I can change one thing, that would be that. And hopefully in time, with funding and maturity, we can.
Yeah. When you think about, what you brought over from, being in corporate for so long, becoming a founder, what are some of the, is it structure? Is it principles, discipline, mission, values? What did you bring over that you've seen as actually fairly valuable for building your company?
Yeah, most of us have come from the corporate world with extensive experience as a result of that. So there is maturity in terms of respect for process, a discipline of control, making sure that if resources are finite, as clear that they are, that we still can execute, that we have priorities, that we make difficult decisions and trade-offs around. If we're going to deliver on something, we will. If we're going to say we're going to meet, we will. If we're going to, obviously test, we do. And so that's kind of this respect, this mutual respect that comes, I think, along with certain number of years being spent in whatever industry. And when, high functioning professionals come together, that's just like a standard of operations that we kind of all share as a team. And I'm super fortunate to have had that, because without that, that's where all of the unpredictability, right? A lot of volatility starts to be experienced amongst the team members.
Yeah. I'm curious to learn more because I'm not. Describe your experience as a female founder and also someone who's not in college, coming out of college. You have a family. There's a lot more at stake. I think about stakes as something fairly impactful for decisions. But there's a lot more at stake for you to go on this journey and be a founder. Describe that experience and with raising money, with talking to other founders. How's it been in your experience to be a female founder who's building a new product, looking for capital, going through this whole experience?
Yeah, things I can't do. I can't do an accelerator. I cannot sit Monday through Saturday, 6 to 9 every day with like a group of wonderful people and call them my core group. I would love to, instead have had, 20 years of a different set of experiences, which I do find to be quite extensible into what we're doing now. So that aside, I truly have not experienced personally yet any other limitation. I've read a bunch. I certainly can imagine and do believe that many of those obstacles are very much out there from a female perspective, just as a fundraising environment overall continues to be a challenge. It is one of the biggest reasons that we were very intentional about becoming bootstrapped in a way that we've continued to obviously operate and demonstrate that we can be. That may be finite of a journey, but up until this point, from a product development point of view, that's one less thing that we were requesting from a pre-seed round. We did our own pre-seed, both from a sweat equity perspective, developing the product, demonstrating that we can execute. I hope with that then in market and in mind, when we do come to a table, VC, angel, whatever comes next, we do have the power of that story to both tell and show. And so remains to be seen at what point and how my experience will be, at that stage. But to date, networking is king. I'm on calls all day long, whether they're topical or not, just exploring opportunities, synergies, relationships, learning from people. For example, like my strength is not in go-to-market strategy or marketing. Is that a core part of our business to come in the way that we'll monetize? Absolutely. That's something that I will learn from others. That's something that I will source in terms of expertise from, other folks that I'll surround myself by. So it's just being super intentional, getting out there. I'm in the city a lot, injecting myself into the entrepreneurial kind of startup world, which I've kind of found to like love and become really impassioned by, finding female circles to be a part of. Shout out to Entreprenista League. They've been wonderful. wonderful female and VC and angel, females that are in the New York area. It's just, there's no better place to be.
Yeah. If you weren't working on this, what would you be doing?
Chief digital officer somewhere at some bank,
Yeah.
building
Why is
mobile
that?
apps. Yeah, building mobile apps and online banking experiences for customers. I mean, this is something that I've kind of done in the latter stage of my career, and I probably would have continued to do that.
Mobile apps is something I don't personally have experience with, but I'm always so fascinated because of their just ability to go viral. You hit a certain amount of, they call it the virality coefficient. I'm not sure if you heard it. I was researching it the other day, and it's just about how many of your customers are going to refer X amount of, new customers to you. But anything above one is good, obviously. One person, one person. For those who aren't familiar with apps, how do you actually hit that virality coefficient? What goes into having people like your product so much that they're going to invite other people? Is it just the experience? Is it the pricing model, the paywall? Is it something else? What goes into actually creating a viral product from a mobile perspective?
Yeah, so many things, and it just always depends, right? It could be a game, like you'll hear about, I'm hearing, but like from my teenager, she and her friends, I'm driving these like swim carpools or whatever in the car with me for a few minutes, and they're like playing these games, and they're so hooked into it, they're addicted, like they're so addicted to it. And then I'm looking at the interface, and I was like, good Lord, this is crap. So it's not sometimes about the interface, sometimes it's about the feeling. There's like a funny
Right.
song that they have in there, and they want to hear that song again, and the only way that they hear the song is when they reach this level and do this other level of stupidity or whatever to get there. So you just like never know what is that hook, the power of the habit, something that becomes this kind of this connection that you have. Sometimes too, it's a matter of curiosity. So you got to be careful about what metric you're looking at in terms of like what's viral. A lot of people can download it because they're curious or they're hooked, but are they really using it? Is it sticky? Are they coming in and day out? Are they in fact referring, others to it? Are they incentivized to refer? Are they gamified to? There's so many different psychological kind of components to it. And so when we thought about how to make some of those principles apply to Orgo is that we've proven, at least through the initial data set, and of course we'll see how that works at scale, but we have a 3x to 5x multiplier inherently built in within Orgo, in that if you, Julian, come into the ecosystem yourself, it's really invaluable. You want to bring in your entire village. You want to bring in your partner, your kids, your mother-in-law, your nanny, your sitter, somebody who's just part of your everyday life in a way that you would want to communicate in a very integrated manner with. And so that inherently then becomes like, well, my mom didn't ask to be on it, but here I am, the user of it, in the way that I can read value from it most immediately, as well as pass that value on to her. Next thing you know, she's getting the invite from me. And so, she's going to go ahead and download and join my crew. We call that your crew. So it's one invitation that starts to garner, this multiplier effect. And so that's another thing that we'll be testing in market to see the power of that multiplying assumption.
Yeah, I love the labels. The crew, it's good. It's good. It goes under rated, just like throwing in natural vernacular to processes.
And being
Super underrated.
conversational. I have to tell you, the thing that I'm most excited about, having gone through this whole process relative to, the contrast of building, quote unquote, or overseeing mobile apps under the banking umbrella, is I can be as conversational in our tone as we want to be. We can be as real and transparent. I don't have branding corporate guidelines to stay with. I don't have like regs to,
Yeah.
to stay constrained by. So that's been the most freeing aspect of it all, is that I can just be a human talking to you, another human, and make sure that we're on the same page. And I use
Yeah.
words that make us get there on that same page. And then we relate accordingly. So we'll see if our copy delivers on that, but that's kind of how we've been trying to tackle it, is like everyday people.
Yeah. I always like to ask for recs on books. Anything that really has lasted the test of time for you in your career, whether it's early or something recent, what has really helped, whether it's as a founder or just staying, sane as a person, you kind of get through your day to day? What books can you bestow upon us?
Oh my God, I'm the worst reader. I have not read a book prior to this whole journey.
Audiobooks are fine.
Not even. I don't even have to commute anymore. I used to at least like drive on highways,
That's fair.
for 2 hours a day each way when I was commuting to the city. But no, so I did a lot of reading, and I ensured that the books that I had chosen were commensurative with the phase and the point of the journey that I was at. So
Mm.
the
Mm,
earliest ones, I think, that kind of shaped the overall big umbrella, big picture understanding, of course, was, The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
of
That's
course.
currently on loan to the team. So otherwise, what you would see is a book with like lots of stickies all over, because I felt like everything was quotable, everything was
Yeah.
shareable, everything was so relevant. So that was superb. But the one that's a little bit of like speaks to who I am as a person is Courage to be Disliked, also with some stickies. This
I've
one's
never,
phenomenal. Oh,
I
no,
haven't
you got
seen
to
that
write
one.
this down. You got to look into it. It
Yeah.
was so, I've never felt seen, like more seen by this book. And I'm like, oh, you shouldn't care about what people think. Like, wow, yes, I've always felt that. Thank you for writing that down. So it kind of is super applicable to life, to parenting, to business. And so this was a very
Uh-huh.
surprising read that started to anchor down some of these concepts. And of course, all the other business stuff, business books that everyone else reads.
Yeah, I like it. The AI
Which
tells me it is rich in wisdom that guides readers through concepts of self-forgiveness, self-care, and mind decluttering. Those are the three
sounds
things that,
fluffy. I'm telling you, but it's not. It is
oh, I'm
so,
gonna say those are the three things that are most important to me.
yeah. So give it a read. Let me know what you
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, it reminds me, I read Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, and that was just a really good
Oh,
book
this is a
overall.
nice way of putting it. That's
Well,
right.
I love the wisdom behind, like I'm big on mental strategies,
Mhm.
whether you're a warrior and you're big into that kind of stuff, or in business. I don't know if you've ever read Thick Face Black Heart by a really famous, um, she was a Chinese businesswoman, well, Chinese American. She has a really interesting background because her whole historical past was impacted by government, economy, and everything that was going on in her country at that time, and came to America. But it was a brilliant story about resilience and positioning your process and how you interpret information to be really strong and resolute. And it's by a woman who went through, just like during that time, a really toxic business environment. And obviously it's changed, but there's still a lot of that, I think, still structurally that we need to get rid of. But it was really powerful to hear her learnings and where they came from.
I'd love to look into that. No, that's very applicative for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure we could have gone probably 2, 3 hours on this episode, but unfortunately I have to come to a close. Is there any question I didn't ask you that I should have? Anything at all?
What do I do outside of all the things that we discussed? Like, what's a
Yeah,
hobby?
yeah. When you have your time finally, what do you like to do?
Oh, the very little of it. Let's see what we slot in there. So all things water, seemingly. So love wakeboarding, boating, being on the water, doing anything. I grew up, in the Ukraine on the water. My dad had a boat, and so we kind of just did that all the time, and got caught in a terrible storm in the Black Sea, but that's for another episode. And so skiing, of course, is another form of water sport, if you will. So skiing is a good one, wakeboarding, all the stuff.
You're kind of an adrenaline junkie. I can kind of feel that.
Oh my God, we did walking with lions in Africa, and elephant back safaris at nighttime, being hunted by lions. I mean, we'll talk. There's more stuff there.
Well, Zoya, it's been such a pleasure. I'm sure we could fill up episodes after episodes with content, but really excited for what you're building. This whole fam tech kind of, I guess, I don't know if it's a revolution, but renaissance into what makes families cohesive and how to organize them better, especially as the world gets more complex. It'll be fascinating to see. And of course, best of luck. Last little bit is, where can we find you and be a fan of you? Give us your plugs, your LinkedIn's, Instagrams, wherever you're at. Where
I
can our
know
audience follow
Instagram.
and be a
Maybe
fan?
like, yeah, maybe I'll be brave enough to do TikTok, so find me there under Orgo. But for now, it's just our marketing website. Sign up for beta, www.orgohq.com. Find me on LinkedIn, Zoya Lehrer.
Zoya, thank you so much for joining the show today. I hope you had a good time.
Wonderful time. Appreciate it.
Of course.
Talk soon.